skip here. This is in the book. This is page 85. A worldview refers to a set of interrelated assumptions and beliefs about the nature of reality, the organization of the universe, the purposes of human life, God, and other philosophical issues that are concerned with the concept of being. It's the overall way people from a certain culture see reality. Worldview helps us locate our place in the universe. Worldview is the way people from a certain culture view themselves in relation to everything else, including other cultures. So worldview is our overall knowledge of the world and our place in it. And the author provides two different worldviews, and I'm going to put up a third, so it'll be more familiar to you. All right, so again, this is on page 85 in your books. And the first set is what he refers to as the African-centered worldview. Interconnection of all things, the spiritual nature of human beings, collective individual identity, the collective inclusive nature of family structure, oneness of mind, body, and spirit, and the value of interpersonal relationships. Which contrasts, it doesn't necessarily, it's not that it's opposed to other worldviews in a conflictual or collision, but it contrasts with a more Hindu worldview, which he lays out here. Law of karma, which binds the person to the universe and necessitates the round of transmigration, which refers to the transmigration of souls, reincarnation, and so on. The concept of Maya, which means that the experienced cosmos is illusory, that there's a greater reality that we don't know yet. The idea of the absolute or pure being which lies behind the world of experience and is viewed as the Atman, the self or soul, the Brahman, the absolute objectively understood, or Nirvana, the highest of good and peace, and the means or techniques of gaining liberation, which is called yoga. All right, so those are very contrasting worldviews, and here's another one, probably more familiar to most of you. And I ordinarily put this up, and we'll come back to it when we get to chapter 10 because it relates to ethics. But this is a Judeo-Christian worldview put into the context of communication. All right. So we have an ethic for the one who speaks, one who expresses him or herself, the addresser. Free choice. Humans are the center of the world. Individual autonomy in speech and association is primary. It has primacy in our everyday lives. Okay, so this is a strong individualistic orientation, not collectivist. The message ethic has to do, and we talked about this last time a little bit when we were discussing values, instrumental values, especially honesty, truthfulness. We give choice to others. We value logic, intellect, and reason, typically, and meaning needs to be transparent. So we strive for a transparency of meaning, which means that the words you use are reflective, as much as possible, of the ideas that you're trying to express, or the feelings that you're trying to express. All right, so we use these criteria typically, although there may be examples of where they're not used, to evaluate a person's speech, how they communicate, what they say, how they are engaged and involved with each other, with other people. And addressee ethic, equal access to information to make choices. The other is persuadable. You're open to persuasion. There's kind of a fundamental principle of persuasion. You're more persuasive if you are open to persuasion.
So, what was the term they just said for that feelings are close to words or
transparency?
Okay, that makes sense.
Transparency. So the words that I use, the references that I make, are connected. They're clear. There's clarity.
Okay.
There's not obfuscation. There's not vagueness. There's not beating around the bush. You know, all the wonderful things we saw in the vice presidential debate the other night. No, just that's a bad joke, sorry. Anybody watch the vice president debate? How many did not watch it? Raise your hand. Oh. I just see you're all engaged politically. You know, funny thing about that debate, because Governor Pence was designated as the winner of the debate. Y'all hear that? Did you hear the results of the debate? How many of you did not hear the results of the debate? How many of you don't care about the results of the debate? I'm going to tell you. All right, so most of you didn't watch it. Well, it's really interesting because Pence came off as very well, you know, he expressed himself very calmly. You know, he didn't get agitated. He didn't react. He was very, how can I put it? He won the style part of the debate by a long shot. He seemed, you know, very calm, very considered, very reflective, not reactive most of the time, although he interrupted a few times, but not like Kane. Kane came off as a bulldog, right? And those of you who saw the debate, I mean, he just came off as this intense bulldog, face down like this, almost kind of sweaty. It's like he was too caffeinated or something. I don't know what it was. He was just very, very aggressive, interrupting, you know, not well presented at all. Did you all, any of those who saw this, did you agree with me? What? Yeah.
I don't know. Kane came off as like he was just angry because of Pence was trying to defend Trump's ideals, and like I was talking with my friend, and it was just like every time they would present something to Pence, it was like he just put his hands over his face and was like, "Oh, he didn't say that," and it was just like, "Oh, but he did."
Yeah, and you have a split screen,
yeah,
right?
So you
was like,
see the he was attacking Pence, and Pence was just like, "Okay, man."
Yeah, right. That. No, he was on the offensive, and I think he was trying to model his style to Biden when he was in debates. But Biden still has the demeanor, you know, that Kane doesn't have. So interesting. Anyway, the point of this is that afterwards there was a fact check, right, by these independent polling. So they checked the facts and the truthfulness of what each candidate said. Kane spoke the truth 80% of the time, according to this, you know, the fact check group. I can't remember the source. Pence told the truth 30% of the time. So, what's that mean? Pence lied 70% of the time and won the debate on style.
That's just silly.
So everybody agrees, all the different news outlets and media outlets agree that Pence won the debate because he was so calm and centered, didn't react, had good style. But he lied 70% of the time.
Oh, jeez.
Kane lost the debate, and he spoke the truth 80% of the time. What's wrong with this picture? Yeah.
People don't want to hear the truth.
People don't want to hear the truth.
It's like the media want people to lie. That's what it seems to be.
Well, style and appearance matter more than substance, right? Yeah.
Pence came off more of like, he came off real cool and collected. He sounded like a pastor when he was talking.
Yeah.
That's what he sounded like.
Right, very cool, collected.
It's like he was preaching to an audience.
Yeah, he was cool and Kane was hot. You know, overly hot. I was even yelling at Kane to shut up a few times. He wasn't listening to me. I don't know. I even pointed at the screen once. I pointed at, I mean, this is how involved I was, right? This is right at the beginning of the debate. There's a split screen, and there's Kane, you know, all intense, and veins are popping out of his head, and he's interrupting all the time. I pointed, I said, "You gotta shut up, man. Shut up." But no, it didn't work. He didn't listen. So, what's this about? Okay, transparency of meaning, partly, right? Whereas Pence obfuscated, his discourse was not transparent in terms of the quote-unquote truth. It counteracts or contradicts this value that we have with transparency of meaning. So what's up with that? Is the media itself, the medium, as McLuhan said, the medium is the message. The medium, if you had just listened to it perhaps on a radio, you'd have a different reaction. Similar to the original TV debate, of course, the paradigmatic debate between Kennedy and Nixon. People who heard the radio broadcast thought Nixon had won. Those who watched TV said clearly Kennedy won. Because of a similar contrast. In that case, it was Nixon who came off bad on the TV, and Kennedy very cool, calm, collected, not reactive, and so on. So we had kind of a repeat on that on the vice presidential debate. All right, that's a bit of a digression, but I did want to bring that up. In terms of our different worldviews, do you think this reflects a Judeo-Christian worldview about communication? You all agree on this?
It seems like politically people are fairly focused on themselves, I'm either on the left or the right or just in between, and that's the way I'm gonna be.
Oh, you mean in terms of the debates?
Yeah, just their worldview, they're not really, gaining anything from other people.
Okay.
And I'm guilty of it too, just,
I mean, they're not listening. So listening and agreeing is problematic. I mean, this is kind of in an interpersonal context. This functions, right? We expect these kinds of values to be operating in an interpersonal context for communication, right? Would you agree? If one of these is not happening, if we're not transparent, we're not making sense, we're irrational, we're lying, not reciprocal, we're not persuadable, and so on, then there's a problem in the interpersonal relationship, right? So, this is how we look out onto the world, and usually this is the kind of criteria that we use to make judgments about others. So this is the point of the worldview as the book lays it out. Okay, so the cultural gaze, we look out into the world and we get looked at. So we stand on this worldview and we look out into the world and we engage others and we assimilate what people say and what they do and their rituals, their practices, their expressiveness based upon our cultural frame, our cultural gaze, our cultural frame. So this is what serves then as the ground of ethnocentrism. So we're going to talk about ethnocentrism and different kinds of ethnocentric practices and processes. Okay, so what is ethnocentrism? What's ethnocentrism? Anybody in here not ethnocentric? What's ethnocentrism?
How you view yourself as compared to others.
Okay, so it's how you view yourself compared to other people, other cultures. All right, and how is it that if you're ethnocentric, how is it that you view yourself?
The best.
As the best, right?
Center yourself.
Pardon?
Center yourself.
You center yourself, right, centric. So your ethno, your culture, is the center of the universe, center of the world, right? So how can you not be ethnocentric? Well, this is a really important question. Because if we cannot not be wait a minute, ethnocentric, right? If we cannot be ethnocentric, then we have no cultural grounding. Does that make sense? But if we cannot not be ethnocentric, then intercultural communication is impossible. So it's a paradox. How can we not be ethnocentric? Yeah.
Just view everybody as the same thing.
Oh, okay. Treat everybody the same?
And everyone just come over with one big thing like
One big
oh,
community?
yeah.
What do you say? Same thing? I can ask people who have their computers up and screens on their, could you shut your computers? Thanks. All right, good. I feel much better now. So how do you deal with ethnocentrism? What's the author of the book do? What's he say? How do we deal with this problem of ethnocentrism?
Well, he kind of takes this stance, and I was kind of surprised by it, but it was interesting. He says some of it is good to like know about our own culture.
Right. I mean, he acknowledges that it's impossible not to be ethnocentric, and goes farther by saying that it can be good to be ethnocentric. We can affirm our ethnocentrism. How does that work? How can we affirm our ethnocentrism? It's a good thing to be ethnocentric. That doesn't seem to make sense, because the whole idea of ethnocentrism is that we're using our cultural criteria to evaluate others from other cultural worlds. So we're going to come back to this, because he calls it ethnocentric affirmation. But in order to understand and appreciate ethnocentric affirmation, we have to first work through ethnocentric reduction, which is problematical, and ethnocentric negation, which is also problematical. All right, so this is a very good way to parse this problem of not being ethnocentric, because we're not neutral beings. We cannot not judge. We judge reflexively all the time. And we judge reflexively based upon our socialization, right? Our experiences, our background knowledge, and so on. Okay, so let's walk through these three different notions of ethnocentrism. Ethnocentric reduction takes place when people from one culture force another culture, or people from another culture, to change and start doing things according to their own frame of reference. Okay? It's a forced situation. Think of any examples of this? Either interpersonally, microscopically, or, bigger, macro kinds of examples. You think of any examples? Have you forced anybody to think like you do lately? Well, we saw an example of it the other day, last week or 2 weeks ago, right? What was it?
Well, we took our rules to the table and kind of took over.
What?
We took the rules for that game.
Oh, yeah, okay, so ethnocentric reduction was in the bargaining game. Good, all right, so you forced other people to follow your rules. You negated their rules.
We did,
Is that if you don't play by our rules, you can't play, right?
Without talking, yes, I suppose.
Without talking. In effect, that's what you were saying. So you force them to play according to your rules. That's ethnocentric reduction, right? Your rules don't count. My rules are better. So there's no negotiation. What are your rules? Here's my rules. Can we kind of merge these rules in some way, right? You force it. Okay, good. Any other examples? We saw a little YouTube video a couple weeks ago. I can't remember what it was. The kebab woman. The angry kebab woman. Right? What was she doing?
Ranting.
ranting, demanding that the people in the shop speak English. She berated them. She berated them
And
for
yet
speaking their own language, yeah.
And yet she couldn't make it through the door.
No, she couldn't make it to the door. Slammed into the door. Okay, any other examples? I think in the broad sense, global sense, yeah.
Would the example you gave us of the woman in the hijab and her
Hijab.
Her clothing on the beach, how they made her take that off, would that be
Right.
ethnocentric reduction?
Yes, that would be ethnocentric reduction. So it's the French police who go to the beach, and the Muslim woman who's wearing her burkini, this is a new word, it just has emerged over the last few years. Burkini, it's a burqa is a long covering that women, very conservative women in the Muslim tradition wear. Not unlike a nun's habit, in some ways. I wonder if they would make a nun take off her clothes at the beach if she was wearing her full. What do you think? Probably not.
They would
Right?
get in serious trouble.
They get in serious trouble. They wouldn't do it, right? Let's run an experiment. Let's go to France. We'll recruit a nun and a woman from the Muslim faith, and we'll put them out on the beach, and we'll see what happens. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think? So the ethnocentric reduction is that the French police come in and they force the woman in the bikini to remove her headpiece and to take off, basically,
Why does it matter though? Like, is she hurting anybody?
Well, they're afraid she got a bomb underneath her clothes or something. So that's ethnocentric reduction. Your religious modesty, your modesty associated with your religion as a woman doesn't count because you're in France, which is a secular state. Laïcité is the secular term.
Doesn't another example of ethnocentric reduction be colonization?
Yes, colonization. What happens in colonization? One country is colonized by another, what happens? Yeah.
The first country who's trying to colonize the second tries to impose their beliefs and cultures onto culture they're trying to take over.
Right. I mean, in many cases, it was not just a matter of imposing beliefs. I mean, in some ways, in some instances, people could still believe as they believed, but it was an imposition politically, educationally, media, in terms of media taking over the media. They built entirely new cities, so it was a modernization kind of project. In Morocco, for example, which is colonized by the French in the main part of the country, in the north it was colonized by the Spanish, and then in the Sahara it was colonized by the Spanish as well. But they built entirely separate cities from the old Medina. So you go into any of the major cities in Morocco, and there's the old city, which is called the Medina, and then there's the new city, which is more modern, right? That was built not just by the French, but they had a huge influence on building the new city. So this is colonization, and the most extreme forms of colonization, of course, is a persecution of the indigenous population, genocide, wiping out those who resist, and so on. So that's extreme colonization. That's ethnocentric reduction. You don't grant the legitimacy of those who are native to the place and their practices, their beliefs, their ways of living.
When the U.S. colonized the Philippines, we were talking about this in history class. The idea was that the Filipino people were very primitive.
Yeah. So
And
we have to bring them into the modern world.
yeah.
We're doing them a favor by pulling them out of their cultural roots. Okay, so that's ethnocentric reduction. It's usually oppressive. It's a matter of force and coercion of a stronger entity, stronger cultural group, national cultural group over another one. Okay, so then we have ethnocentric negation. Takes place when people in one culture completely disregard another culture. Right, so this is also a danger, negation. Why is this a danger? Disregard. Disconfirm and disregard. Any ideas? Yeah. Can't hear you. It's inconsiderate. Okay. Okay, I agree. I think there's an inconsideration and disconfirmation that takes place. But can you think of any examples? Like we had some examples of ethnocentric reduction. Can you think of any examples of ethnocentric negation?
The American Revolution.
What about it?
Like, the British wanted us to pay for stuff that they, like back in their home country, but we're like, no, we're gonna do stuff here. So, the hell with that, and then it became a war, so.
Yeah, I guess, negation can escalate into outright conflict, certainly. We don't have legitimacy here. If we try to impose it, force ethnocentric reduction on us, then we're going to fight back. It's kind of active resistance. So I guess we could see that negation can evolve into some kind of conflict, certainly. Okay, yeah.
Trail of Tears.
Pardon?
The Trail of Tears.
Trail of Tears was really reductive, don't you think? I mean, this is the long march of the Cherokee from the East Coast to Oklahoma. Put on reservations, and so many of them died along the way. Yeah. Well, that's reduction too. It's an eliminating an entire ethno-cultural group, religious group, right? That's reduction. So Holocaust, genocide. I mean, this is genocide. Same with Trail of Tears and the plight of this year. Yeah.
How about different tribes that
Okay, so they ignore each other. They live near each other, but they ignore each other. Different tribes. Okay. Like, for example.
like, if you read on like Facebook the different weird facts about tribes that still practice cannibalism and stuff, and tribes like that in certain areas.
Yeah, I read that every day.
And you mind.
Okay, right. So you just leave them alone. Let them do what they want. Just don't come try to eat me.
Yeah, sure.
Right? That kind of what it. Yeah.
Isn't the government trying to like build an oil well really?
Dakotans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Native American ground.
Yes.
Is that negation or is that reduction?
Well, to the extent that they're successful in building the pipeline, then it is it's reduction to the extent that they push out the tribes that are protesting it. I mean, there's a conflict there. So there's no affirmation. Although the federal government has stepped in and said you have to find a new route so it doesn't go through this. It's about water as well as sacred ground. Because you're going through an area where they can contaminate the water if there's any kind of leakage. Yeah. Okay, good. What do you think, Amish? Is that negation?
Sort of keeping itself clear.
Yeah, they keep to themselves. They say, okay, all you English, you can do whatever you want, leave us alone. And the American government has basically said, okay, you want to have your own culture within the larger society, operates according to some different rules. We won't force your kids to go to school. In public schools, you educate your own, that's negation. Good example. That's a kind of an ethnocentric negation.
lose on rail is like a Christian or a Jew, and then you can really see the separation.
Right, okay, yeah. So there's a separation, and sometimes it boils into conflict, right? And of course, there's a colonization process that's taking place as well. Israel is colonizing the West Bank in many, many different ways, and East Jerusalem now, too. Not just the West Bank, but also East Jerusalem. It's an incremental process of colonizing the entire area. So, yeah.
America and Russia during the Cold War.
Right. I mean, there was not a whole lot of interest in intercultural exchange between the two when that was happening, right? So they negated each other, but they could not deal with each other. So there was no reduction, there was no affirmation, there was just a negative dynamic between the two. But you know who kept talking during the Cold War, and maybe hopefully are still talking today? And even during the Cold War, you know that both militaries had open lines to communicate with each other. There were even some instances where there was misinformation that one or the other had launched missiles, and so the military guys called each other up and said, "Hey, did you just launch a missile?" They said, No, it wasn't us. Oh, okay, great, thanks. I feel, So I mean, they were still in contact with each other. This is really an amazing phenomenon. There were open lines of communication among some major military leaders in both countries, even during the height of the Cold War. Yeah.
Yeah, there was that one part of the Cold War where they were I think the Russians were gonna cross into like American waters or whatever.
Well, that's a Cuban Missile Crisis.
Cuban Missile Crisis, yeah, or whatever. But
Yeah, that's different. I'm not talking about that. I mean, that was a real crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union was going to put missiles in Cuba.
yeah,
They actually had the missiles on the ships that were coming to Cuba, to nuclear missiles to launch from Cuba aimed at the United States. That's as close as we've come to nuclear war. Okay, no, so we have negation, right? It's a negative. If there's any interaction, it's negative, but mostly it's about just dismissing the other, not acknowledging their legitimacy. It's ignoring. Yeah, they're there, but I don't care. I don't want to deal with it. You meet someone from another culture, you're like, oh gee, they speak a weird language. They're, have all these other characteristics. I don't want to deal with it. So you don't deal with it. You just ignore them. All right, that's the essence of negation. Okay, so then we have affirmation. This is the hero of the story. Ethnocentric affirmation takes place when people from different cultures have equal authority, which is the ideal for effective intercultural communication. Equal authority. Equal authority. So there's equal respect. Okay? One is not trying to impose his or her values, beliefs, attitudes, norms, and so on the other, necessarily. You wanting to learn the different norms and practices and values and beliefs of each other. You wanting to learn each other's languages. And you want to develop a more complex cultural identity yourself by and through that interaction. That's ethnocentric affirmation. So you recognize that you have a worldview, that you have an ethnocentric orientation to the world, that you are filtering what you perceive, what you experience through your values, your beliefs, your norms, and so on. And you are reflexive, right? You recognize how that happens, how that is taking place in you. You may put up some resistance, but you recognize it and you adapt. You communicate with the other who has equal authority in a particular situation that may arise, and you work at adaptation to accommodate the other's view. Yeah.
So what's this affirmation thing like?
Pardon?
I'm still a little confused.
You affirm the other as the other affirms you. Okay? I'll give you a quick example at an interpersonal level. Okay? When I lived in Morocco, this is in 98, 99, I lived with my wife, who was Moroccan, in a little place in Hudaya. And, you know, in this old area, the outdoors, we had a little garden, and from the garden, you could see the rooftops of the other little, they're not villas, but they're just really old places that had, you know, to get from the kitchen to the living room, you had to go outside. There was no inside. You couldn't walk through the house, right? So it was lined up like this. Here was the kitchen. You had to come outside to go into the bedroom. You could go into the restroom and the living room that way, but then otherwise you had to come outside to the garden. Anyway, there's a bench in the garden. We're talking about a relatively small area, you know, probably about from here to that desk and over to the wall. That was our garden area. And on the roofs over here, people would hang their laundry to dry. You know, kids would play up there and so on. So this was one year during Ramadan. I was not fasting. I was sitting in the garden eating an apple, and somebody threw a rock. Okay? Ping! I just heard a rock hit. Okay? I'm like, oh, gee, where did that come from? You know? And then, ping, another little rock hit, you know, somewhere else. I'm eating the apple. Uh-oh. What's going on here? So I go back in, I find my wife, and I said, gosh, you know, I just got, somebody's throwing rocks. She goes, well, why? What's going on? I said, I don't know. She goes, well, I had an apple in my hand. And she said, were you eating the apple in the garden? I said, yeah. She said, well, that's why. Somebody saw you eating an apple, and it's, you know, you're supposed to be fasting. I said, well, I'm an American, and this is my house. Worldview. Right? That was my immediate response. Hey, I'm an American, and I'm eating in my house. I'll do whatever I want in my house. And she said, no, you're in Morocco, and it's Ramadan, and people can see into our garden, and so you can't eat in the garden. So, we had to have a discussion about this, right?
Well, couldn't you just eat inside and then eat that way?
Well, here's the other thing. I said, I'm not Muslim, so it's okay. And she said, no, you're married to a Muslim, so it's not okay. If you're married to a Muslim, you're a Muslim, so you can't be doing this. Huh? Yeah, I mean, I had to convert too. I'm Muslim, by the way. Don't know, do I look like a typical Muslim? No, I had to convert to Islam when I was in Rome.
They forced you to?
Well, if I wanted to get married, we had to get married in Morocco as well as in the United States in order to live together without being arrested. But it was really for the family, you know, so for the family, so I had to go through that process. That's another story I can tell you another time. All right, you still want to listen to me now that you know that I'm Muslim? It's okay.
I do.
So it was a negotiation that had to take place, right? A negotiation had to take place. If I had said, screw it, I'm going to eat wherever the hell I want because this is my house and I'm an American, and yeah, I'm just Muslim in name. Wow, what's that? That's an imposition. It's ethnocentric negation, right? That's ethnocentric negation. So we had to compromise. So in that process of compromise, we had to affirm each other. That's what happened. That's an affirmation. An ethnocentric affirmation that had to take place in order to resolve the conflict. So, to the extent that you can engage the other, recognize the legitimacy of their practices and their values and beliefs without feeling as though it's somehow going to negate your own, then that's affirmation. If you feel like you're going to be negated and you withdraw and the other one gets pushed away, that's negation. If you demand that the other abide by your practices and values and beliefs and histories, that's reduction. You follow me? So, being ethnocentric means, you have to be critically ethnocentric. To be ethnocentric without being critical means that you just unconsciously impose your views on it and everybody else that you engage. To be critically ethnocentric means that you recognize the degree to which your own prejudices, your own stereotypes, your own histories, your own values and beliefs are filtering everything that you are seeing and hearing and engaging, and you adjust. You recognize the legitimacy of the other point of view as long as it's not coercive and violent. Part of the problem that we have in this kind of process is that we're afraid that if we acknowledge the legitimacy of the other point of view and adjust ourselves, right, change and adapt, that somehow our identity is threatened. That we're going to lose our identity. That's not the case. What happens is you become more culturally complex. You become more bicultural. So you can recognize the situations where this one cultural disposition is most appropriate as opposed to another. You adapt. This is not being wishy-washy. It's not being chameleon-like. Okay? It's learning how the other thinks, feels, values, believes, and adjust to their language and practices and so on. Okay? And they're doing the same thing. That's affirmation. Okay, let's talk about positionality. So the author, this is about, this is the principle for the chapter, and the author breaks down this idea of positionality into three dimensions. Grounding, right? Authority and narratives. It's the second one, and the third is engagement. All right, so let's look at these. The notion of grounding. There's always some ground upon which we are expressing ourselves. And as we are engaged with others, we're on the ground. Some cultures consider the ground literally as the past. Where's the past? Americans tend to think the past is where? Behind us, right? It's behind us. Other cultures think of the past as what's in front of us. How can that be? How can the past be in front of us and the future is behind us? Very different orientation to the world, right? Different kind of grounding. Can you imagine that? The future is behind me. Again, we don't even think those terms. Those metaphors don't work for most Americans. Future being behind us. Why would the future be behind us? Yeah.
Because we don't know what the future entails. We know what the past will, but we don't know what the future has for us.
Which means what? We can't see it. We can see the past. It's in front of us. Makes sense, right? Future is behind us because we can't see it. We don't know what's going to happen. So it's a shift in cultural ground on time, right? And then some cultures consider the past to be the ground that we walk on, literally, in nature. How come? How can that be? How can?
It's like we're walking through life.
Yeah, walk through life, but what's in the ground? Huh?
The dead.
The dead, that's right. Our ancestors are in the ground. Very good. Not only are the dead in the ground and buried in the ground, that's our ancestors, that's our past, but what else? Their DNA is spread all over nature. Right? I mean, in some cultures, literally, animals will come eat the dead. So DNA becomes infused into the natural world, and hence some pantheistic beliefs, right? That our spirit is in nature. Our spirits of the dead are in nature. Literally. Spread about. Okay, so these are different kinds of groundings with regard to time. All right? So it orients our view of the world and others, and how people interact with each other. Okay, so our cultural grounding provides us with how we, interact with others, how we perceive others, how we are held together as a culture, and so on. All right, we'll talk about a little bit the different kinds of values, the worldviews, and so on. So let's go on to this notion of authority. But I do mention here that if you're coming from a sociocentric point of view, that is that the group has greater value than the individual, that's a kind of grounding that's very, very different from an individualistic approach, where it's the person itself and his or her accomplishments that matter, rather than the group or the community. Right? So those are two very different kinds of grounding. So let's look at authority. Second kind of prong or dimension of this idea of positionality is that there is authority, there's power. Power that determines, or authorities that determine what is important, how are we going to value, what stories do we uphold, what narratives do we uphold, do we abide by? You mentioned the Israel-Palestine conflict. These are grounded in very old stories. Very, very old stories, right? Going all the way back to Abraham. What's the oldest story here? Jews and Muslims are divided all the way back to Abraham, although they have Abraham as a common ancestor. Right? Abraham's a common ancestor, but what happened? What? Can't hear you, sorry. Okay, so Hagar, her name was, right, bore a child, Abraham's first son, whose name was Ishmael. Thank you. Very good. Wow, you're hitting 100. Yeah. So Ishmael was his first son, but he was the son of Abraham's slave, right? Because Sarah, his wife, was barren, supposedly, quote unquote, and could not bear children. So Sarah gave him permission, quote unquote, you know the story? Y'all know the story? To bear a child with Hagar, which he did. And then what happens? Miracle of miracles. Sarah bears a son, becomes pregnant, and who is her son? Isaac. Isaac and Ishmael is the oldest story in our theology of the West, right? So, for Jews, who does Isaac take with him to the mountain, the Temple Mount, which is now, in Jerusalem, to sacrifice when he hears the voice of God? Sacrifice your son. For Jews, it's Isaac. For Muslims, it's Ishmael. These are two very different stories. Well, it's the same story with different persons, right? Is what it boils down to. So these are old stories that abide, not just about who's going to be sacrificed. Of course, then the angel comes and says, "Hey, you don't have to sacrifice your son. Well, why don't you kill that sheep over there instead?" right? So they killed the sheep, and the son, Isaac, for the Jews, Ishmael for the Muslims is spared, or Arabs,
Why
Jews.
did God want Abraham to kill his son?
Well, want to get into that?
I don't get why.
Two, what does God want? God wants you to prove your faith.
But if you
He had a problem with Job. You know the story of Job, right?
You gave him the kid in the first place, like you're
Yeah.
supposed to believe that children are a gift from whatever God you believe in. It's kind of hypocritical. Yay, I'm gonna give you this kid, now prove your loyalty, kill it.
Right. We got a little problem there, don't we? All right, let's hold on to that. Right, different stories, very different stories, and senses of legitimacy attached to those stories. What about the Cold War story? Somebody brought up the Cold War, instances of the Cold War. Two very different stories between the Soviet Union and the United States. What about the Iraq War? Two very different stories. More than two, multiple different stories. Any kind of conflict that you want to look at, there's going to be different stories, different narratives that ground that conflict on both sides and legitimize violence, oftentimes violence, or collisions of some kind. Right? So who has the authority over the construction of those stories? Where's it come from? Who do you believe? You're going to believe your parents, your teachers, people in your own cultural group, and you're going to abide by what they value and what they believe. That's where the authority comes from. So you see this in any situation where there is conflict. Wherever there's conflict, there's a different story being played out. Okay, what's some examples, just in recent events here? What are some different stories? The vice presidential debate, great. We've got some different stories going on there, right? Very different kinds of stories, narratives, groundings that are in conflict with one another, but they're not shooting each other. Thankfully. What about some other stories, narratives that ground or justify conflict of some kind, interculturally? Any examples? Yeah.
The Vietnam War.
What about it?
A lot of people, there was a big issue on whether it was between like the hippie culture and then the regular people, whether we should be
The hippie culture and the regular people?
You know what I mean? Like the people that felt like, okay, we shouldn't be there, it's not our business, and then there's other people like,
Right.
oh, we're America, we need to step in there.
And we need to step in because of a story. What's the story that motivated stepping in to Vietnam? Yeah, the spread of communism. It's the domino theory. That's a story. It's a narrative, the domino theory. Oh, if we let Vietnam fall, then Thailand's going to go, then Laos is going to go, and then who knows, then it's going to be the Philippines and Indonesia, and then communism is going to come to Japan, and so that was a domino theory. And then the Gulf of Tonkin, which was a fabricated story, right? That an American vessel had been attacked by the North Vietnamese, which gave Lyndon Johnson the rationale or the basis for putting out an invasion force. You know who died today? Speaking of the Vietnam War, anybody listen to this? Y'all ever hear of Hanoi Hannah?
Yeah.
Hanoi Hannah died today, 87 years old. Who was Hanoi Hannah? She told all kinds of stories, right? She told the North Vietnamese story on the radio 3 times a day, aimed at American GIs. Who listened to her? In English, Hanoi Hannah. She was the propaganda voice of the North Vietnamese during the Vietnam War. Died today at age 87. If you're interested. Seems like you're not. Any other stories, clashing stories, rationales going on, current events these days? And what's the authority? How can you weigh out the authority? We have to determine who is most authority. Well, I talked about it earlier, you know, the labor and management stories, very different stories. These are clashes. Very different positions, groundings. Black Lives Matter movement, right? Against police violence, very different stories.
Well, with politics, there's this idea by Clinton supporters that some of her like email stuff and other stuff, like with the chairperson of the Democratic committee, that she hired her despite her like there's this idea with Clinton supporters that, oh, that's getting blown out of proportion. But people that for whatever reason and from a variety of perspectives don't support Clinton are saying, no, this is a...
Right, so there are very different kinds of perspectives based upon her candidacy or Trump's candidacy especially, but also to a lesser extent to Gary Johnson's candidacy and Jill Stein's candidacy, right? Jill Stein's a Green Party candidate, Gary Johnson's Libertarian candidate. So they have very different kinds of agendas and stories, but also the background stories about, you know, for Trump, his business dealings, his taxes, for Clinton, her emails, her interventions during the Arab Spring, and so on. So it's really telling the story in a way that makes the most sense and appeals to the widest audience that's going to win the election. In any kind of legal dispute, what's the primary purpose of a defense or a prosecution? To come up with a theory of the case that is believable, right? And then come up with language that's associated with that story that's going to really get people to believe, or the judge to believe, that your story is the right story. That's a theory of the case. So all this has to do with authority and power, who has the capacity to create these stories and express them in such a way, or narratives, that others are going to agree or go along with it, one way or another. Then we have grand narratives, big narratives, right? What's an example of a grand narrative and a conflict in different grand narratives? Let's see, meta narratives or grand narratives. Anybody? Science and religion. Creationism or evolutionism? These are two very different stories. And which one's most legitimate? Well, if you believe in science, is science a matter of belief? Science will say, well, gee, no, it's not really a matter of belief. Others will say, yeah, it's a belief, and it's a belief just like I believe, in creationism, and we should look at these as equal, and we should have equal time to teach creationism in our public schools as much as evolutionism. What do you think? Are they equally valid? Who has the authority to decide? How do we make those decisions? This is big. This is big. Yeah.
I feel like if you got to that point, then school would just take forever because you'd have to teach every belief system on wherever.
Teach every. Well, the two big ones in this country are in Kansas. You have to teach. They teach creationism in their public schools. Yeah.
I thought it was up to who's looking at a secular school system in that sense.
That's right. They're supposed to ensure a secular school system. That's right. But states have a lot of power in determining the focus of their own curriculum. In Kansas, I think particularly, this has really come to the forefront. I don't see it, it's certainly not happening in Pennsylvania. There's people not clamoring to teach creationism in the schools. But nonetheless, it's a story. It's a grand narrative. It's a story. And then there's the ideological grand narratives, right? Communism, socialism, democracy, capitalism. Which is the right, ideology? Which is the best economic theory? what's the best story is going to govern us. These are big stories. These are the grand narratives. Okay, so there's a lot of little narratives that fit underneath these different grand narratives. And you can trace them back in various ways to those conflicts as well. Okay, so the last dimension of this notion of positionality is engagement. I guess my mic keeps coming and going, right? This one work? Oh, this is good. All right, so similar to what the author talked about before with regard to affirmation, right? So he's kind of mapping on to these different ethnocentric positions here. Right? So engagement is about affirmation. It's about working towards some integrative view. It's not assimilation, right? You don't have to become like me. I don't have to negate you, or vice versa, right? We can find ways to link up. So it's about linkage. Engagement is about linkage. It's a recognition that, my ground, even though my ground may change, it's not going to be an earthquake change. And if you converted to another religion, I mean, even within Christianity, like Protestant to Catholic or Catholic to something, I mean, it's a little shift, right? It's a little shift in the ground of your beliefs that takes place. And you can see it in an integrative way. I mean, when I went through the whole process with Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam are Christian. They're the same. There's no difference. Is there a God? Yeah. Are there prophets? Yeah. You believe that it's important to cleanse yourself spiritually by fasting? Yeah. I did that as a Catholic growing up. What about giving to the poor? You want to do that? Yeah, I think giving to people in need is an important thing. So these are pillars. They're the same. They're integrative. Same with Judaism, Christianity, Islam have as much in common as there may be differences. When you look at the principles that guide them, that's an integrative approach. It's an affirmative approach. It's not negation or reduction and so on. All right, so this is what happens also on an interpersonal basis. To be integrative and to engage is to learn the other person's language. To understand why they practice certain things that you don't. And to try it out, especially when you're adapting to another cultural world, to another society. You want to experiment. You want to try things out. You want to engage. You want to understand the language and what their background is. And become bicultural, ideally bilingual. Doesn't mean that you negate your previous socialization and grounding. You don't do away with it. It becomes blended into something that's greater, a greater sense of complexity and identity. All right, so this is the importance of positionality and understanding positionality and how it plays out in various ways. Have any questions about any of this stuff? Yes?
Okay, so you said that the 3 dimensions of positionality are grounding, authority, and narratives?
No, it's grounding, and authority is linked up with narrative. Okay, so who has the authoritative story, right? Who has the authoritative narrative? How does narrative express the authority of your cultural worldview? Okay, and then the third is engagement. Any other questions? Okay, so look, don't put yourself away yet. Hold on. Yeah, you have a question?
What was the difference between like grand narrative and short narrative?
What?
Narratives and short narratives?
Well, everyday narratives are the stories that we tell, right? I mean, about our experience and our different cultural worldviews. I mean, the grand narratives you can look at as these overarching stories, quote unquote, or narratives that we depend upon in order to really be sustainable in our cultural worlds, in our societies. Okay, so religion is a grand narrative. Different religions have big narratives that guide their belief systems and those who are involved or are part of that religion. Science is a grand narrative. Okay, it tells the story of the natural and physical sciences and the social sciences, the human sciences, and so on, and how things are the way they are. And there's ideology, which is more political. That's another kind of grand narrative that subsumes many other forms, like economics, right? So these are the big stories. Whereas in our everyday lives, we have our own stories, our own narratives of the groups that we're part of, or the values that we hold that are linked up to some grand narratives, but they are not necessarily just related to the grand narratives. There's other stuff going on. Okay, so next Tuesday is reading day.